What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I have yet another collection update for you. And this isn't even into the Florida run or the Denver run. Obviously, I'm back from Denver because I got this sick Neuromorphic shirt, which they absolutely whooped ass at Denver Death Fest. And depending on when this one comes out, this may or may not have already been recapped by John and Miller. But I'm going to say Denver Death Fest was a fucking blast. It was a wild time, and I got to see a lot of killer underground acts. So I was actually working on this batch before I left for Florida. Came back, worked on it some more, then got on another plane because there's been a lot of that going on lately. And now I'm back here to recap this one, and this will include a lot of reissues, just some random pickups, and stuff that I bought at live shows. Not Denver Death Fest, but one I went to well before that. So yeah, we have another tremendous deck, so let's get right down to it. Conjureth, the Levitation Manifest. This is the second demo from the San Diego-based death metal act featuring current and former members of Incofination, Void Ceremonia, and Golgotha. I actually have one of their albums. I actually covered in a collection update a while ago, and I dug it. It's very old school, nasty death metal, very haunting and ghastly, especially when it comes down to vocals. They are definitely more that sort of ghastly sort of register where they're not like all low growls. They're very just kind of creepy sounding. I saw this on the shelf. I figured why not pick it up? I know they have a new album out right now. I still haven't had a chance to check that out, but I liked the one that I picked up. And again, fiercely old school death metal, definitely a lot of nods to Incantation, but also some thrashier material, especially on the title track on here. There's some really nice melodic tremolo harmonies on Where Fools Abandon the Cross. This is only 4 tracks, so it's a very short offering, but it definitely keeps the energy up. Now, it does have some rough edges, namely on the vocals. The song Smoldering Desolate Unrest kind of go a little overboard on the ghastly thing. It kind of sounds like you're getting a song of like all of Glenn Benton's highs and like those first 3 Deicide albums. And while I like those, doing them all the time, it kind of got to be a bit much and kind of made it a little too over the top for me. Like mixing in some more lows in there probably would have helped. But overall, I like the songwriting on here. A lot of cool atmosphere. The riffs are solid. I like the fact that there's some thrashier elements to it. So overall, I thought this was a pretty solid demo, and I definitely want to check out that new one. I just got to get around to finding it, but I have enough music to go through for a while, so I might hold off on that for just a little bit. But anyway, if you like stuff like Incantation, maybe like a little bit of, Pestilence in there too, definitely check this out. This was a pretty nasty release. Darkthrone Goatlord. This is the 2023 remaster / re-release of their second album that essentially got tabled back when they were more death metal. Now this is the all-instrumental version, and I have another version of Goatlord with all the vocals on it, and honestly, it's not one of my favorites. Actually, it was kind of lower on my list when we ranked Darkthrone forever ago, but I dig this. I think as an instrumental album, this really works. I'm a big fan of Soulside Journey, so I do like their earlier death metal stuff, and this definitely screams more of a transitional album. Like there's elements of black metal in here, there's even elements of death doom on here, but musically I would say it's definitely more rooted in death metal overall. It just has sort of a creepier atmosphere. Now these are very raw, and I really dig that because they are legit just like studio outtakes. There's even like a little bit of banter between the band members before they go into a song. I can't understand what they're saying because they're speaking Norwegian, but I'm sure it's something goofy because Fenris likes to say goofy shit. I think without the vocals there to distract, which again, I'm not a big fan of the vocals on there, especially the high vocals on there, which a lot of people thought were female vocals, and it was just, Fenris with a little bit of pitch correction. But without the vocals, the music stands out, and you get to hear how intricate and twisting all these riffs are, and Fenris's drum work on here is really fucking good. And he's very minimalistic these days. Like he's kind of taking the Lars Ulrich approach to a lot of his drumming, minimal accents, minimal turnovers. But honestly, he's a pretty solid drummer. He just doesn't do any of that now. And I guess to a degree, the newer music really doesn't call for anything flashy on drums. But songs like Below and Possessed and Blasphemer, God, even Wolf. There's enough dynamics on those songs that actually call for some more intricate playing. And again, with all the cool riff work on here that has a lot of variety to it. Again, like doom metal, death metal, a little bit of black metal, definitely some Celtic Frost worship, which they're definitely known for. There's a good reason to actually have some more intricate drum work, and it really works on here. You also get a vastly different version of A Blaze in the Northern Sky on here, which I like the original much better, but this was kind of cool to hear it in a more raw form. Honestly, I like this version a lot better than the version I have with the vocals. I mean, the vocals, again, were kind of distracting, but I think with the more raw, like sort of studio jam sound to this, it really feels like you're just sitting in the studio jamming these songs with them, and I really dig that vibe. If you have slept on this one for whatever reason, and, you know, maybe you're like me, you're a little kind of iffy on Goatlord, check out this version. The instrumental versions, I think, are the way to go if the vocals were a main detractor for you. Outside of that, if you're a big Darkthrone fan, I just recommend getting it because these were a lot of fun. So yeah, check it out. Necrom. All paths are left here. This is the first album from this Ukrainian-based death metal act. And honestly, with an album title like that, that's literally the perfect way to say I love Entombed without actually saying I love Entombed. Even right down to the album cover, which is not Dan Seagrave, because I legit just thought it was, just looking at it. I mean, look at it. It looks like Dan Seagrave. It's actually Alex Tarsis, which, I mean, I know exactly where he gets his inspiration from. So with the album title and the album cover, really aren't a lot of guesses as to what this sounds like, and, well, yeah, if it sounds like Swedish death metal, there's a good chance I'll love it, and yes, it does. Actually, a little bit more melodic than a lot of, like, early Stockholm stuff. So it doesn't necessarily sound like a straight ripoff of Left Hand Path or like an Ever-Flowing Stream. It actually has spots of melody on there. There's really good atmosphere, really good lead melodies on here, which I would say kind of makes it a little bit more akin to Hypocrisy at times, which that's also a fucking awesome band, so I have literally no problem with that either. The guitar tone, definitely a thick HM2 tone. Of course, I love it. Even the vocals kind of have a little bit of like LG sound to it. But I like a lot of the atmospheric touches on here, like the very doomy opening to Templars Are Coming, or even The Woods of Weird West. They're nice and brooding and slow, and they kind of just build up this nasty wall of just, you know, riffs and atmosphere. There's even some really cool horror synths in the song Walls Have Hands, which I don't know if that's like a weird sequel to The Hills Have Eyes, but I'm just going to go ahead and say that English being a second language, maybe there was something lost in translation in there to make it sound more creepy and less weird. But yeah, no, I dig this. I dig that it is, you know, flat out HM2 worship. Of course, I love that sort of thing, but I like the fact that there is more melody and atmosphere on here than I expect, because, you know, there's a ton of HM2 bands out there that kind of just stick rigidly to the formula set forth by awesome bands like Entombed and Dismember, but this band actually adds a lot of melody, atmosphere, and just a little bit of melodeath in there to kind of give it a little bit more catchiness. But they're also good about not putting in too much melody as to like sort of water down the heaviness, because I mean, man, dude, this album has some sick breakdowns and just absolutely pulverizing riffs. If you have never heard of this band, much like I hadn't before I picked it up, definitely check this out. This is, again, straight up Swedish death metal. Again, if you love Bloodbath, Entombed, Dismember, pick an HM2 band, and then maybe like a little bit of like Hypocrisy in there, definitely check this out. This is an absolutely nasty debut. Neurosis and Jarbo. This is the lone collaboration between California post-metal legends and the former Swans vocalist. Probably one of the only things that was really missing in terms of like Neurosis stuff. I had always been kind of on the fence about this one because I know this one is kind of vastly different than Neurosis, and well, I've never really sat down and listened to much Swans, so Swans are still kind of a mystery for me. I know that kind of like a band like Killing Joke, they're not necessarily a metal band, but they get a lot of respect from the metal community. I have just never sat down and jammed Swans. I know Swans is much loved by a lot of metalheads, just never got around to it. So this was kind of an interesting one. And I don't know if I'm necessarily a fan of all of it. This mostly thrives on atmosphere and more just like sort of an unsettling nature. It isn't the big down-tuned riff fest that, you know, Neurosis can be. I mean, of course, there's tons of atmosphere in that band, but I don't know if this necessarily gets very heavy at any point, but I feel like this is more vocally driven by Jarbo, and her vocals are quite haunting, quite creepy too. Like there's a lot of just sort of hissing and sort of breathing and snarling and chanting to a degree. I don't know, it's very unsettling, and I would say this is a little bit more electronic. Like His Last Words and Cringe definitely have more like samples and synths and such. And in terms of like the overall vibe, if I was going to compare like the samples and the synths to anything in terms of Neurosis's back catalog, I would say it's kind of close to like Souls at Zero or maybe Enemy of the Sun. Like, it has that more unsettling nature, whereas like later releases, it would start kind of blending in and become like more, I don't know if epic's the right word, but I don't know, more akin to what you hear in post-metal in general. I will say that Erase has a little bit more of a Neurosis vibe, especially when Jarbo starts screaming and yelling, "Define me." And the last track, Seizure, has a really good, like, slow build to it, you know, very akin to a lot of, like, longer Neurosis tracks. But honestly, the whole vibe of this album is kind of creepy background music. Like, this isn't something I would put on to just sit back and really dissect, because a lot of it is very repetitive, especially the last track, Seizure, where it's just really drawn out. A lot of the songs kind of just keep going on. Like, there's not a lot of like big dynamic sweeps to it to really, you know, make the songs interesting, make them stand out. While a lot of this, I would say, is very emotional and dark, it's not very gripping. Now, to be fair, this probably has a lot to do with me not being super familiar with Swans. That is just a band that I have not managed to check out at any point, but I do want to check them out based on this, but maybe this really wasn't the best segue into Swans, namely because this isn't Swans. I don't know, this album just kind of didn't do it for me. Not bad by any stretch. Like, I think it's still well done for what it is. It's just, you know, one of those situations where what it is, I'm just not that into. But still urge you guys to check it out, form your own opinions. Like, if you like more noise-oriented stuff, like maybe the more softer moments of like Unsane or something like that, or, I mean, if you're a big Swans fan, I'm sure you probably already have this. It does seem like it's more for Swans fans than Neurosis fans, but yeah, it's still worth checking out. So yeah, check it out. Sanctifying Ritual. This is their self-titled debut, came out in 2020. This is a German death metal act, and this is death metal, but like late 80s death metal. Like, this is death metal when it still had like a lot of thrash to it. Very raw, very muddy. Honestly, very similar to bands like Possessed, Sarcophago, I would even say early Morbid Angel at points. This definitely has like a ton of thrash to it, but also like a little bit of that proto-black metal sound where we didn't necessarily know what we were calling it yet, but it was more dark and evil sounding than maybe thrash metal. I would even say there's like a little bit of punkiness to it, like kind of similar to Nunslaughter in a way, where it is just very raw, primal, but very energetic and in your face. It's a very fast-moving album, and I think it might be a single kick drum on here in some parts. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember if there were like big double bass runs on here, but when they were doing blast beats, it sounds like a single kick drum doing it. So, I mean, props to the fucking drummer for that exhausting maneuver. But the main thing I love about this is it is absolutely packed with killer riffs. Like, Obsessed by Gore kind of has like an early Sepultura vibe, like kind of around like Schizophrenia. Lots of squealy dive bombs. The vocals have like a very Celtic Frost sound with an appropriate amount of reverb on them. And despite it being more raw, there are some really cool dynamics in here, namely on Stained with Rotten Blood. There's a cool acoustic lead into it. And it even does slow down and get a little bit groovier in spots like Throne of Evil Atrocity. Now, these song titles are a lot of fucking fun. I do like that. And yeah, the album cover is fucking creepy, but the back cover, that's quite a crowd there. Lots of human raisins there because they're pretty damn dried out. But I really dug this. I actually saw this in distros for a while and I just didn't pounce on it, namely because it was pouncing on like fucking 18 other things. But I saw this one in my local record store and I figured why not? It was relatively cheap and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's pretty much a bullet train of a pace. Like, it's a very quick album, minus a few spots where it is a little bit more slow and moody, but man, it's fucking fun. It keeps the energy up pretty much the entire time, and I really enjoyed this. So if you haven't checked this album out for whatever reason, or you just saw it in distro and didn't pounce on it like I didn't, definitely check it out. This is a cool little window back in time to like the formative years of death metal before we kind of even had a real name for it. It's raw and ugly and a fuck ton of fun, so yeah, check it out. Sepulchral Curse, Deathbed Sessions. This is the third EP from this Finnish black and death metal act. Features members of Soluthus, which I'm a big fan of that awesome death doom act. And I know this band has a full length out. I've been meaning to get it, but I saw this one in a used bin and yeah, I had to pounce on it, and I'm so glad I did because this is absolutely awesome. Now, once again, due to my shorthand and notes, they didn't put any of the track names in the back, so I'm going to have to go by the one word that I chose out of all the track names that I felt made them stand out so I could find them in the back, which that fucking failed. But I can tell you that I absolutely love this, and one of the main things I loved about this EP is the variety in the songs. You have slow, brooding, more death doom songs with like sort of a cold, blackened atmosphere, alternating vocals between highs and lows. But man, the songwriting dynamics on here are absolutely fantastic. This can shift from absolutely bruising blackened death metal to, I would say, like early In Flames style melodic death metal with really good guitar harmonies. There's also classic heavy metal bits on here, D beats, it gets a little crusty at times. The song Dystheist, or at least that song has at least one word there called Dystheist, because that's the only word I wrote down. That song has incredible guitar harmonies, very, lush, very melodic, but also just flat out bruising when it comes down to the breakdowns of the song. And these songs are a little bit longer too, so there's a lot of room for them to work in like really cool transitions and such. Like a sort of surprise thrashy section in that song, I think towards the middle/end of it. Again, probably should have wrote down the track names to avoid confusion, which really sucks because there's an awesome Demigod cover here from Slumber of Sullen Eyes, which I absolutely love that album. That is just a fucking amazing album. And yeah, fuck it, I'm just gonna see if I can find it in here. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Towards the Shrouded Infinity. They cover that. They do an amazing job. So yeah, I flat out fucking dig this. If you love Finnish death metal, I'm reasonably sure you will love this. I think the thing that really stood out to me were all the cool dynamics and the really awesome surprises all throughout this. I definitely need to get their full length. I think they only have one, but I'm definitely going to have to pick it up because if it's anything like this, I'm probably going to love it. So yeah, if you dig Finnish death metal, a little bit of black metal, thrash metal, I don't know, just really dynamic death metal in general, definitely check this out. Suffering Sights, When Sanity Becomes Insanity. This is the debut album from this Chilean death metal act. I actually had seen this album kind of floating around in distros for a while, much like Sanctifying Ritual. Actually, I think it was the same distro. I think it was Caligari Records. Anyway, didn't pounce on it, and I should have because this is absolutely awesome. Chilean death metal has become, in terms of like South American death metal, some of my favorite. It's kind of surpassing Brazil a little bit, but don't worry, Brazil, I still love you. But Chile, you're on fucking fire, and this one pretty much adds to the heap of amazing fucking death metal coming out of there. Now, much like Sanctifying Ritual, this is along the lines of more like late 80s death metal, like still more in its formative years, still a ton of thrash. In fact, the opening track, Suffering Sights, kind of sounds like Hit the Lights in a way. It has that opening little flurry of drums, and then it gets right down to it, very DB driven, just fast and aggressive, and very thrashy. Like, this is a very thrashy style of death metal. It does have some moments in here where it does sound a little bit more straightforward death metal, like namely Hypocrite, The Truth Will Be Known. That song has, some decidedly more like Morbid Angel, tremolo riffs, or even like some actual blast beats, which blast beats aren't the thing that really propelled this. This is more of a thrashy speed, so you get a lot of D beats in here. And when it comes down to the groovier sections and breakdowns, they feel more like thrash breakdowns, like stuff you would hear on like, Schizophrenia or Beneath the Remains. But I'd say a lot of it is very comparable to Possessed and Death for damn sure. Especially when it comes down to like the frantic pace of this, which I would say this album's very paced like early Death and early Possessed, where it's just fucking going. There's definitely spots of groove on here, but for the most part, a good chunk of this album is just flying. And honestly, I kind of just dig it. Like, it's very rapid fire. The production here is also really good. I do think the bass is slightly thin, but the guitar tone is just chunky as hell, and I just really like how it propels the songs. I dig this entire album, but I think the last three tracks in particular, Worthy Acts of Hate, Desperate Search, and Corrupted Childhood, are probably the ones that stand out the most, especially Corrupted Childhood because it's a little bit more atmospheric. And well, the song title reminded me of the first time I discovered Hustler magazine, which was, stuck in between the mattress and the box springs of my dad's bed. Me being 6 years old at the time, I really wasn't sure what was going on, but man, they sure looked like they were having fun. Anyway, I think the atmosphere on that song is a little bit different. It's a little bit more haunting and creepy versus the heightened aggression of like every other track in here. But yeah, this whole album whoops ass. Yet another one that I, again, saw floating around in distros and I just didn't pick up because, again, I was picking up like everything else. But yeah, this is absolutely fantastic, and we're going to get another dose of Chile here in a second because, well, Chile's got a lot of kick-ass bands, including this one. So yeah, if you have not checked this out for any reason, and you love shit like Possessed, Death, Sepultura, a little bit of Morbid Angel, all that shit, definitely check this out. Suppression, The Sorrow of Soul Through Flesh. This is the debut album from this also Chilean death metal act. I've heard a lot of praise about this album. I believe Rick from Dreadful Minutes really talked this one up, and I trust his judgment. I just didn't trust it soon enough because I waited this long to get it. And holy shit, he was right, and so was literally everyone else that said this was awesome, because it is. Unlike Suffering Sights, this one's a little bit more close to like the, early to mid 90s style of death metal, where it is definitely more aggressive, definitely moving away from thrash metal. Like, it still has a bit of the thrashy energy, but this has way more blast beats, way more palm muted chugging that is just super aggressive, very similar to Cannibal Corpse in a lot of spots, but vocally very much along the lines of like Asphyx, Pestilence, and Obituary, because you kind of get this Martin Van Drunen meets John Tardy style, and those are two of my favorite death metal vocalists, so naturally, I fucking loved it. The guitars are thick and chunky. The bass work on here is absolutely fantastic, and a little bit of a surprise for me, because I don't know, it feels decidedly more melodic than you'd kind of expect from this. I mean, kind of similar to Cannibal Corpse, where you have this absolutely awesome bassist in there, but part of me thinks he might be playing on a fretless bass. I'm not entirely sure, but there's some noodles on there, or borderline like lead moments on there in terms of like bass work that kind of sounds like it's fretless. You really get to hear that on a track like Unwinding Harmonies, which opens up more dissonant and atmospheric. And the bass work is a little bit more pronounced, namely because the guitars aren't, doing the relentless chugging, so you can really hear all the cool stuff he's doing. Which kind of continues on Lost Eyes, where there is a section of just relentless chugging, but underneath the chugging, you hear these really awesome bass runs. And that was definitely something that struck me about this album, are the dynamics. Their songwriting is absolutely awesome. There's a lot of just flat out awesome brutal riffing and grooves, especially on Unperpetual Misery. But throughout this listen, there's a lot of cool moments that are just a little bit outside of the box to add a little bit of flavor. Like the cool Spanish guitars that show up on Arrowheads, it adds a lot of cool melody to it. This is absolutely fucking crushing, and once again adds to the whole thing that I think Chile might be surpassing Brazil in terms of their death metal, at least, because, man, there's been a lot of killer stuff coming out of that country here lately. This album is flat out fantastic, and honestly, like, this might have had a chance at a year-end list last year if I had actually listened to it then. So, yeah, one that I missed that, man, I really shouldn't have, because this is literally everything I love about death metal on this fucking album. If you have not checked out this album, I strongly recommend it if you love Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation, Death. I mean, literally, these guys just kind of run the gamut of all the things I like about death metal on one album, and they do an excellent job. So yeah, just check this one out. I'm willing to say that if you're a death metal fan in general, you will just flat out dig this. So check it out. All right, got a pair here that I've been meaning to get, and luckily they were reissued, and one of our awesome subscribers told me about it, so I fucking pounced on it. So we have two here from Intestinal Ballism. We have their debut, An Anatomy of the Beast, and their second album, Banquet of Darkness. Now this is a Japanese death metal / melodic death metal act. I've heard this band talked about with such reverence for so fucking long that I had to check them out. And, I did check them out on YouTube. I was really impressed. And then, it turns out it's kind of hard to find their stuff. But luckily we have these reissues now. So yeah, if you're like me and been waiting for a chance to get them, go get them. Anyway, this band is fucking awesome. This debut here is absolutely monstrous. And in terms of melodic death metal, if we are to call it melodic death metal, because I still think maybe just calling them flat out death metal is more accurate. But if this is melodic death metal, this might be one of the most brutal melodic death metal albums I've heard. This is flat out furious. Like, more like a melodic death metal version of Deicide in spots. Big, nasty, heavy riffs, but they do pepper in a lot of cool, like, melodic lead runs like you would hear in, like, Dark Tranquility, At the Gates, In Flames, Hypocrisy. But again, brutal. Lots of blast beats, very deep vocals, and just relentless energy. The brutal low vocals are complemented very well by high screams, which are almost more blackened and shrieky. And again, with the music being a little bit more adventurous in terms of melodic death metal, because this doesn't necessarily fit on the umbrella of a lot of the Gothenburg stuff. Like, it has moments, but a lot of this is very much a blend between, I would say, Floridian death metal and just melodic death metal in general. Because while you get like great melodic hooks on songs like Cannibal, Sodom, A Place Their Gods Left Behind, and the really cool instrumental Burn Thou in Effigy, you still get absolutely crushing breakdowns that are, again, more akin to just flat out death metal on songs like Alistair Possess and, oh Jesus, what is that fucking word? Energumensis, The Birth of the Cursed Creations. I don't know if I've ever seen that word before. But anyway, flat out brutality. And this is the kind of mellow death that I can get into where it doesn't kind of just get stuck in that, Gothenburg sound. Nothing against that sound because I grew up on it. I fucking love it. But it can get a little bit stale. With the added brutality and sort of like atypical elements in terms of their songwriting when it comes down to just melodic death metal, makes it a lot more interesting. But yeah, flat out crushing. This one, I would say, is maybe a little bit thrashier, faster, and maybe more melodic. I think the production is a little bit more crisp on here where the guitars are out front. Like there's a lot of thrashy sections on here that remind me more of like The Haunted than it does At the Gates. And I want to say I think this one's a little bit more hooky too. Not as though they are dialing down the brutality. It is still brutal as fuck and probably still some of the heaviest mellow death I've ever listened to. But it is notably just a bit catchier in terms of the songs. Especially the songs A Night Appears from the Lake of Blood and The Planet. Both of those have a little bit more of that straightforward Gothenburg style. Still some thrashy touches to it, but definitely more hooky. But those brutal elements definitely show back up on here, namely on the last track, Born But Buried, I Can See the Light. Both of these albums are absolutely fantastic. I'm hoping that Severed and Sewer Rot get together and reissue the rest of their albums because I believe there's 2 other ones. I have been sleeping on this band for way too long. Holy shit, this is some of the best melodic death metal, if it is in fact melodic death metal, that I have heard. And to me it is because this doesn't sound like your run-of-the-mill melodic death metal. The brutal elements on here mixed in with the very catchy old school Gothenburg sound, man, that makes it really fucking stand out. I really wish there was more melodic death metal out there like this. I mean, there probably is. I just haven't found it yet, but holy shit, this is absolutely incredible. If you have not checked out either one of these, I strongly recommend both. I believe these are both remasters too, and they sound absolutely fucking marvelous. Like you still have all the rawness of the production, but it's a little bit cleaner. Anyway, super glad I picked up these reissues. Go find them yourselves. They're both fucking absolutely incredible. And again, I hope they do the other ones as well. So yeah, check them both out. All right, so the next 4 are all by the same band, and that band is Cognitive. When we saw them with Gorod, Flub, and Summoning the Lich, I just decided to pick up all their shit because I owned none of it. So we're starting off here with the Horrid Swarm, which is their debut EP. This is a New Jersey-based tech death slash, I mean, I guess you can call it deathcore. I mean, the Archives did. I don't know if I entirely agree with it, but I would definitely say it has elements of brutal death in there mixed in with tech death. It's technical and brutal and, I would say more along the lines of death metal. We actually got to sit around and BS with their guitarist Rob Wharton, who's actually a big fan of us, which I thought was really cool. He's also a big fan of Metalomania too, and I know he and Crypt have gone back and forth. I think he's even been on the show in terms of like interviews. Solid dude. So I decided I was going to buy everything they had available in CD because, again, I don't own any of their stuff. And honestly, I kind of like that I did that because you get a really good sense of the evolution of their sound over the course of a number of albums. And this one is definitely more raw and brutal. First off, I got to make one little dig here. If you're going to do a brutal band, I think your logo should be more brutal than the album title, because the album title here looks decidedly more brutal than the, logo for the band. Luckily, that would change over the course of the albums. But overall, their sound is very along the lines of like modern tech death. You have a lot of blast beats, big chugs, guttural vocals. I mean, it's brutal as hell. I guess you could say it has a little bit of deathcore, especially when it comes down to the breakdowns. The breakdowns have a bit of that deathcore sound, but they're absolutely brutal and pummeling. And while they are kind of like one of the big things on here, there's a lot of other cool stuff going on that would also pop up over the course of the albums, which would be, I guess you could say, almost like sort of like progressive death metal moments. There are sections on here that kind of sound more akin to like, later death, like Individual Thought Patterns and Human, like where all of a sudden you have this more proggy flourish and like really pretty, lead melodies and solos on here, and then it gets right back to the brutality. That was what really stood out to me on the song Falling Skies. Like out of kind of nowhere, you get this like sort of prog metal break that kind of sounds a little bit like Cynic, and then it kind of reverts back to like its outright heaviness. There were some really cool samples peppered in there too for atmosphere, and overall I really dug it. I will say that some of the transitions here are a little rough at times, like Numbered and Slaughtered. Some of the transitions get a little too jagged, but again, this was like their first release and they're still kind of finding their sound at this point, and there's a lot here that really works and would carry over to later albums. Like I really like the title track a lot. There's really good melodic elements on there, especially at the end. There's a great lead on there too. This was pretty solid, but honestly, like out of all of them, it's probably my least favorite, and that isn't to say this is bad, it's just I think this band continuously kept getting better. But I still strongly recommend this one. Shorter offering, it's brutal as hell, and again, some really cool surprises. So yeah, definitely check this one out. And then we have their second album, Deformity. This actually features, I believe, a new guitarist, new bassist, and a new vocalist on here. So there was kind of like a bit of an overhaul as far as members on here, and yeah, this is where they decided, hey, the logo needs to look brutal, and it does. Actually, I really dig this cover. I guess that's like some sort of like giant Godzilla-sized Wendigo, which that's pretty cool. I'd like to see Godzilla whoop the shit out of that thing. Now, I remember seeing teasers for this on YouTube for Unique Leader, and I just didn't listen to it for whatever fucking reason. I mean, again, there's a ton of stuff I fucking listen to, so I'm gonna miss some stuff. But I definitely see this one as an improvement over the EP. The production, I think, is much tighter on here. The vocals are way more pronounced. This new vocalist on here, which, you know, they would change vocalists again, definitely a better range, more pronounced growls. I think the transitions are a little bit smoother on here. And I would even say this one's a tad more on the brutal side. Like, you get some more brutal death metal slams in here, especially on Haunted Justice and Dead Soil. And speaking of Haunted Justice, once again, that proggy sort of flourish kind of shows up again, as well as on The Forgotten, which is really catchy. Like, there's some really awesome melodies going on that song in particular, but I like how that little wrinkle is thrown in amongst all the flat out brutality on here, because this is just a relentlessly heavy fucking album. Now, I will say, like, one of the drawbacks might be the fact that there are some more like pig vocals on here, like the piggy burps that show up on Dead Soil, but man, that song has such a good chuggy groove to it. It's not used all the time, so I can actually kind of tolerate it. But yeah, I see this one as a definite improvement overall, and once again, sort of tightening up their sound. And again, I like that little proggy wrinkle they throw in every now and then. But yeah, another solid album. Strongly recommend this one. And honestly, I think it keeps getting better from this point on. So yeah, definitely check this one out. And next up, we have their fourth album, Matricide. This one features a new drummer and new vocalist, which is actually their current vocalist now. And this one I see is probably my favorite out of the bunch. This one, they just pretty much do everything they've been doing well, except they sort of subtracted some elements, namely any sort of things that sound more chorish. This sounds more like modern death metal with a little bit of like a brutal death metal accent to it. Even down to most of the breakdowns, it feels like there's less of that, you know, deathcore-ish sort of sound to it. Maybe on Fragmented Perception, you get a little bit of like that sort of down-tempo sort of deathcore sound, like kind of like Acacia Strain. But for the most part, the breakdowns are more intricate, and I think the guitar work in here is even more intricate and way more melodic in spots. This actually kind of goes full bore in terms of having like a proggy section in a song. They actually have songs that are decidedly more proggy throughout. Namely Clouds of Rust, which honestly kind of sounds like an early Rivers of Nile song. There's way more atmosphere to it. The melodies are catchy. And Torn for the Void is probably the most melodic and proggy song I think they've done. There's even clean vocals on there, and they actually work really well. I think there's been some like clean vocals that have been peppered in a little bit, but I think this is the first time they really worked on here. But overall, this album feels more technical, more melodic, more intricate, and I really dig it. It flows really well. I don't think anything on here came across as jarring. I think this is probably their most well-rounded work overall, and I've come back to this one quite a bit. I really enjoyed this album. This album just feels bigger in scope overall, and something I feel like they've been kind of working towards. And I like the fact that they threw in, again, some more decidedly proggy songs rather than just have like little proggy sections scattered amongst, you know, their like more standard brutal sound. There's tons of brutality in here, but those proggy songs kind of open this album a little bit more, and it makes it a more like well-rounded offering. Absolutely solid album. Out of all these, I would probably recommend this one the most, but honestly, I'd recommend them all. But yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. Definitely check it out. And then we have their fourth album, Malevolent Thoughts of a Hastened Extinction. This one came out in 2021. We thought about reviewing this one, but again, you know, lots of other stuff was coming up. And while I know I said I liked the last one a bit more, that isn't to say I don't like this one, because this is also an awesome album. Again, another turnover in members. You have a new rhythm section here, so new drummer, new bassist. And this one is also solid. I do think that it is a little bit more stripped down. It's more go for the throat sort of grooves and chugs. It is kind of missing a little bit of those proggy flourishes that were on the last album, but it does sort of make up for that with just unbridled intensity. I do like how the opening track, ENIAC, opens up with an old dial-up modem sound, which kind of threw me back to the old AOL days. But the overall vibe in this album is more groove-laden, more brutal. In fact, I would say this is more of just a straightforward brutal death metal album, and more about, I think, the groove overall. The songs The Maul, Arterial Red, From the Depths, definitely just kind of lay on big, syncopated, heavy, chuggy grooves. There's definitely some more techie stuff overall in here, like namely Ouroboros, which is like a tech death blitz. But a lot of this is more about just syncopated, head-bangable grooves, and I would say essentially getting the crowd going. Arterial Red actually has some like more old school Meshuggah-like grooves on it. And From the Depths actually kind of sounds like a Decapitated songs to a degree. But this album is still packed full of really cool riffs. Honestly, probably my favorite one on here was Tearing Tendon from Bone. There are some just absolutely crushing but very catchy riffs on that song especially. You do get some cool cleans that show up on Destitute, but I don't think they're implemented as well as they were on Matricide in terms of where they put in cleans there. But overall, this is another solid fucking album from them. I'm only missing one now, and I think maybe one EP. And believe me, I'm going to hunt those down because all these albums I thought were really solid. And again, it was kind of cool listening to them all in order because you get a good sense of growth. So, I don't know, it's kind of like a mini ranking here, even though, you know, if we ever rank, you know, cognitive, who knows, shit might change. But I know I dig this one, and I know I dig all of these. So yeah, if you've never checked out Cognitive, I recommend diving into them. If you like tight, modern death metal, a little bit of tech death, and a little bit of like progressive death sort of like peppered in there. If you like any of that stuff, I think you would probably enjoy this album and probably the other ones too. So yeah, check out Cognitive. Solid fucking band. All right, got a couple here by Flub. This was another band on the bill with Gorod and Cognitive and Something Lich, and they also put on an absolutely killer show. We have their self-titled debut here and their most recent Dream Worlds EP. This is a California-based tech death slash progressive melodic death metal slash tech melodic death metal. I don't know. They're very techy, they're very tuneful, and they're a lot of fun to watch live. Now, on their debut here, they have current and former members of Velopanath, Altar Beast, and Rivers of Nile, and stylistically, this is really a lot of fun. They play a lot of like neoclassical like riffs and melodies on here, but mixed in with like very catchy melodic death metal. When it comes down to like the neoclassical elements, like I hear a lot of Baroque stuff. You especially hear it in the lead work, which the lead work on here is just constantly going. There's just so much wild guitar work and cool synths and just lavish drums. And it's a lot of fun. Generally, tech death, I'm kind of dicey on, but when it's done with like this much flair and this much melody, it can be really interesting. There's a lot of flashy play, but all of it feels like fun. It doesn't feel stiff or rigid. There's a lot of fun grooves, like the opening track, Last Breath, just kind of has this very, I don't know, sort of bouncy groove to it. Especially the song Umbra Mortis with the tapping and synths that kind of come in and kind of builds up into these really cool breakdowns. The songwriting here is very clever, and vocally I really enjoy this too. Michael Alvarez, formerly of Altar Beast, has a really cool range, very similar to Trevor from Black Dahlia Murder, which, I mean, there's some stuff in here that definitely sounds like Black Dahlia Murder as well. But again, with that more neoclassical sort of sense to it. I think this is just really fun. It's a very short full length. In fact, these two are almost the same length, and this one's considered an EP. This, I believe, is under a half an hour. But it is packed to the brim with just a lot of fun songwriting that really made this engaging. And honestly, both of these come out on the Artisan Era record, so I guess in a way, like, you kind of know what the production sounds like. It's very clean, very polished. But yeah, really dug this one. This one, also really good. We have a little bit of a lineup shift on here. We have Eric W. Brown of Necrogoblicon on drums on this one, and Andrew Kim on bass. He's from Inferi. And at this point, I think the main members of this band are Michael Alvarez on vocals and Eloy Mentes, who is the ex-member of Velopanath. At least I think that's how it is. I think the production is a little bit bigger on here. I think the synths pop a little bit more. Everything is a little bit more punchy, especially the vocals. The vocals are more out front. They were kind of in the back on this one, but I think they sound a lot better in here being more out front. It really showcases all the stuff that Michael Alvarez can do, which he can even do cleans on here too, which work really well. Again, very techy, very busy, but also very fun because there's, again, a ton of melody associated with this. Paracosm in particular is a big standout for me on here. I love all the wild, busy riffs on here. And again, despite it being so busy, it's very catchy and very infectious. The drum work in here, very tight. My only issue here is that it kind of goes by in a flash because Well, this is only 4 tracks, and they are very quick, but they also throw on 4 instrumental versions of all the tracks in here. So it kind of does lengthen it out, but this is still like under a half an hour. So yeah, you're essentially kind of retreading over the album, albeit in an instrumental version, which is good and bad in a way. It's good because the music itself is absolutely awesome. They did an awesome job orchestrating and putting all these songs together, and despite them being very short, they're very intricate and they do flow well. But without the vocals, you're kind of missing one of the big dynamics on it, which is Michael Alvarez's vocals. He adds a lot to it. Albeit, still, this is a lot of fun to listen to, both in terms of just the regular tracks and the instrumental tracks. I just feel like doing all the instrumental tracks at the end, and it kind of feels like a needless extra, but at the same time, I'm really not complaining that much because it's just kind of cool hearing them as instrumental versions as well. But overall, I dig both of these. I'm kind of hit or miss when it comes down to tech death, but I think these guys are kind of close to that Gorod style where there's a lot of melody and hooks as well as like the very technical show-off sort of moments on there too. So it kind of balances out really well. So I'm going to recommend this, again, if you're a fan of like Inferi, Gorod, pretty much anything that's on the Artisan Era records. It's very much in that, sort of vein. But yeah, definitely check them out. Both of them really good. Age, or AJE, which I believe stands for Armed Government's Heir. The Scar of Lead. This is the second album from this Japanese hardcore / crust / thrash metal act. And I picked this one up on a whim. I saw that it was listed as thrash metal and cross punk and hardcore. And I'm like, well, I mean, there's a damn good chance I'll like that. And I did. This is absolutely awesome. Flies by in a fucking minute, but I enjoyed every fucking grimy, crusty moment on here. I would say for the most part that this is like more of a D-beat sort of crust album with like thrash metal sort of mixed in. So like a good chunk of this is more, akin to like Discharge or Dysphere or any other diss bands that worship Discharge. And then like crossover thrash. The production is raw as hell. The guitars kind of sound dirty. Like the opening track, Scar of Lead, I actually had to turn down my fucking speakers because, man, the amount of gain on those guitars was kind of fucking irritating, but as soon as it starts settling into the riffs, it actually really works. A lot of this is just straightforward D-beat ragers. I mean, you get some groovier moments on Outside the Window and The Night Kills You, but for the most part, this album flies by. You have great gruff vocals. They're kind of like an extra dirty version of like Lemmy. It's kind of like a nice little bridge between punk vocals and thrash vocals. I mean, they're kind of closely related anyway. Very few leads on here, but most of the time they're just kind of squealy dive bombs, and mostly this is just about the full throttle punk energy of it all. I absolutely love the opening riff on Outside the Window. It's instantly fucking catchy. I just like how pissed off and fucking fun this album is. And I tell you, there is nothing more crust or punk than doing, well, a crust punk fucking cover of Twisted Sister's Stay Hungry, which closes the album, and honestly, they do a great job. They strip it back to its most raw elements and fucking peel off all the mascara and fucking rouge and eyeliner and all that shit from Twisted Sister and turn them into a filthy fucking punk band, and it works. It's fucking great. This is very short, but it's a fun collection of barn burners to actually destroy something too. Really dig this. I'm not entirely sure how much other stuff they have. I think it might be mostly EPs. There might be another full length or two out there, but I definitely want to find more by them because this is just fun. If you're into bands like Dysphere and Discharge and I would say like Toxic Holocaust or Wraith and shit like that, definitely check this out. I've become a big fan of Japan's metal scene, and here's another one that I really dig. So yeah, if you like any of the shit that I described, definitely check this out. Alaric, End of Mirrors. It's the third album from this Oakland-based post-punk / post-rock, maybe post-metal act. I pretty much bought it on a whim because I saw the Nearot recording stamp on it. And I was like, yeah, fuck it, let's check it out. And this is a pretty interesting listen. I would not call it a metal album. Like, even calling it post-metal feels like a bit of a reach because a lot of this is more based on like post-punk. I would say like stuff like Amoebics, maybe Killing Joke, possibly Swans. I'm not entirely sure, again, because I haven't listened to a lot of Swans. But it's heavy more in, like, mood than it is in, like, riffs. Like, the opening track, Demon, definitely has some big, bottom-heavy, doomy riffs. Very akin to Neurosis. But as the album goes on, it kind of, like, shifts gears a lot, and it plays a lot on ambience and atmosphere rather than it does, like, big, riffy hooks. Lots of odd, groaning vocals, and the bass work on here Sometimes I'm not sure if it's a bass or a synth because it's very strange. There's a lot of atonal stuff going on here, which really contributes to like the dark, foreboding atmosphere on here. It's all very dreary, very distant. You do have some more crust punk spots like Wreckage or the title track. Adore has some, as well as some really cool tribal drums toward the end. But a lot of this is, again, more about atmosphere, and it kind of drones along. Like, there's some songs in here I really do like Shrinking World, I think, is a really catchy song. As well as the last track, Angel, which I was a little disappointed it wasn't a cover of Massive Attack's Angel, which I think they probably could have done a really good job. But the song itself is probably the most melodic and catchy offering on here. A lot of this is just very dark and moody, and it occasionally gels, and then a lot of the times I kind of feel like it just kind of hangs on there and kind of just keeps building this sort of dark, twisted atmosphere and really not building like a song to go with it. I like atmosphere, I like dissonance and all that stuff, but I feel like there still needs to be more to really draw me in. But this was only my first experience with this band. You know, I don't know what the other two sound like. I might actually check them out. But this was just sort of a, I don't know, like an odd listen. Like, you put it on the background and I don't know, it just makes for good sad background music, I guess. I don't know. I haven't come back to this one much because it didn't really grab me the first time, but I might listen to this one again, see if I can get like a better read on it. But overall, it didn't really grab me right away, but that isn't to say it's bad at all. It's just to say it didn't grab me right away. This might be your thing. If you're probably more into like Amoebics, Killing Joke, and like Swans, maybe a little bit of Cave In, like circa Jupiter too. Again, like all those things I like. Well, I mean, minus Swans because I really haven't listened to them much, so I can't really say. But I don't know, it doesn't quite gel for me on here. But still, I urge you to check it out. Again, if you like post-metal, post-punk, post-something or other. I don't know, it's post-something. But yeah, definitely check it out. Form your own opinions. Who knows, you might really dig this. Fate's Warning, No Exit. This is the fourth album from these Connecticut prog metal legends. This was the first one that actually featured Ray Alder on vocals, and from what I gather, it's a bit of a divisive album with some fans. There does seem to be like a slight divide when it comes down to like people that are a big fan of the John Arch era and people that are a big fan of the Ray Alder era. And, well, I mean, honestly, I haven't listened to much of the John Arch stuff, but so far the Ray Alder era has been pretty good. His vocals on here are absolutely fantastic. He's very comparable to Jeff Tate, I think, in his earlier years. Really great range, really piercing high vocals. But the thing I like about this album is this is a pretty heavy album. Like, Fate's Warning, I mean, they're heavy for a prog metal band, but this one kind of gets thrash metal heavy, especially on songs like Shades of Heavenly Death. That is easily probably my favorite track on here. Absolutely catchy, but very heavy. Like, lots of cool, tight, thrashy riffs, very memorable leads. Ray Alder singing his fucking balls off. But outside of being like a heavier album, there's of course tons of cool dynamics and, you know, different songs. Like In a Word is maybe like, I guess, a power ballad on here. I think it's okay. It doesn't necessarily flow very well, but I think Anarchy Divine is pretty damn sick too. No Exit's sort of a needless intro, but my main issue on here is with the giant opus, The Ivory Gate of Dreams. I love it. I think it's absolutely awesome from start to finish. It's just the fact that on this CD version, it breaks up every movement into an individual track rather than letting it go be the, like probably 25-minute track that it actually is. The songwriting is fucking great, especially on part 4, Quietus. Has some great Iron Maiden gallops on it. Really catchy movements. Honestly, there's really great songwriting throughout this entire thing. It's just sometimes the track breaks can be really jarring, like especially between Ivory Tower and Whispers on the Wind, parts 5 and 6. It just feels very knee-jerk. Like, I don't know if that was an issue with like this pressing or that's just how it originally was, but if it was all tracked as one on the CD, I think it would probably flow a little bit better. But overall, I dug this. And this is kind of me continuing my journey into Fate's Warning territory, which, spoiler alert, you'll definitely see more Fate's Warning coming up in the Florida run, which that will kick off with the next collection update, and that's going to take a while to get through. But this actually had some cool bonuses with the demos on here, and generally I don't really go listen to the demos very much, but I wanted to check them out, and hearing Ray's voice in just a demo like this very raw vocal take, man, That dude has some impressive pipes. And this does come with a DV too. This is the 25th anniversary version. I still haven't watched that, but eventually we'll sit down and watch it. But yeah, I dig this one. I think this is a pretty solid album. And again, I see, at least in terms of the archives, in terms of the reviews, it is a bit divisive with some fans because, again, the Arch versus Alder thing seems to be still very real in terms of the fan base of this band. But yeah, so I recommend this one. If you're a big prog metal fan, you have not heard this album for whatever reason. I know this band's, you know, pretty much that same level of famous Queensryche and fucking Dream Theater. But yeah, like me, there are some people out there that still haven't checked it out. So yeah, I'm going to say check this one out. Pretty good. Possibly a little bit heavier in terms of like the earlier stuff, but still really fucking good. Let's check it out. October 31. Bury the Hatchet. This is the 4th album from this Virginia-based heavy metal act featuring King Fowley of Deceased fame. I'm a big fan of Deceased. I've been meaning to check this band out for a while, and honestly, it's kind of what I expected. This is like the heavy metal version of Deceased. It's riffy, it's got a huge 80s vibe to it, a little bit more raw and gritty in terms of like heavy metal. Like, you know, King Fowley's voice, while he can carry a tune, he's got that gruff delivery, and it kind of adds to like just his delivery in general, which is like, you know, him telling stories about horror and shit like that. And that is, you know, something that I love about Deceased, and it kind of carries over here, albeit with like slightly different riffs. Like, you don't get like a lot of the big thrashy moments or like stuff that is more like death thrash like you get in Deceased, but you get some good heavy metal licks and some fun kind of silly songs about murder and horror stories, and that's honestly kind of what I ordered with this. Down on Lover's Lane might be one of my favorites on here. It does get like a little bit thrashier, but the storytelling elements really come into play, especially on the more bass-driven breakdown where, you know, King Fowley starts doing a spoken word, and that just sort of fucking works with him. Like, his delivery is almost like a growled spoken word in terms of like telling this dramatic story anyway, and hearing him a little bit more subdued, and then the keys sort of come in the background. I don't know, it just kind of makes it just appropriately spooky and fun. And that's pretty much what I wanted out of this. I mean, overall, I think it's good. I do think some of the songs kind of run together stylistically, like you hear a lot of, you know, kind of repeated tropes and such, but they're a fun repetition. And, you know, while I do think some of this stuff does bleed into Deceased territory, that's not the worst territory to bleed into. Plus, I mean, it's King. King sounds like King, and inevitably, I think anything that he is doing the vocals on, if you have heavy riffs behind it, you're gonna think of Deceased. At least, I think you should. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. First time I've ever like sat down and listened to October 31. I think I'll probably check out some more of their albums for sure. But yeah, I don't think it reinvents the wheel or anything like that. And honestly, I do think Deceased is better than this, but this was still really good. So yeah, if you just like some goofy, kind of more gritty versions of 80s heavy metal, definitely check this out. And finally, we have Portal, Vexovoid. Bet you guys are a little bit surprised by this one. Anyway, this is the 4th album from this Australian band of nightmare merchants and, well, black and death metal. I don't know what to call Portal, but I saw this one in a used bin. It was relatively cheap, and I guess this one's kind of hard to find these days. But I decided to give Portal like an actual chance and go back and listen to some of their earlier stuff, because there's no way in hell I'm listening to Hag Balby again, and even Avow was a bit much. But this one is maybe a little bit more listenable, at least as far as their brand of extremity is. It is hard to describe this band, because, I mean, honestly, I guess you could say that any non-metal fan would hear this and think that this is what all like death metal or black metal sounds like. And, well, they'd be definitely off, but yeah, like, this is just insanely heavy. The guitars in here are so thick and chuggy, but honestly, like, the production here isn't too bad, minus the vocals, because they sound like they are fucking way back in the mix and kind of muffled, like he was doing the vocal takes with that giant fucking clock thing on his head the entire time. I don't know, but they are definitely way back in the mix, and this is very guitar dominated, I would say. And the guitars are doing some of the most insane descending and ascending riffs. It's atonal and dissonant and ugly. But honestly, some of this was actually pretty catchy. Like, I gotta give him credit on the song Curtain. I like the more doomy build up to it, and then, you know, it just explodes into blast beats and just twisted tremolo riffs. But there's spots of melody in here, which was kind of something that I was missing on Avowed to actually like get me to really appreciate that. Now, of course, there's like just like batshit crazy stuff in here. Like the end of Plasm is just like a wall of fucking noise. And yeah, it's just kind of unsettling. Like it makes your fucking skin itch just listening to it. So yeah, way to go, Portal. You creeped out my skin as well as my fucking brain. As much as this feels more restrained than, say, Avow, it is still very difficult to get into. Like you get a lot of sections of what I would describe as like swarming gnats in riff form. Like they just kind of come at you, and I don't know, like it just kind of feels like, you know, bugs swirling around your ears like during the summertime, just like doing this all the time. Kind of the same effect. And the song structure is wild. Like you have so many abrupt shifts into just the most chaotic, apocalyptic riffing I think I've heard. It's like every twisted riff that Incantation ever wrote, but without like the song structure to keep it going. Like it's just one nightmarish section after the other. But admittedly, this one wasn't too bad. Like I actually kind of dug a good chunk of this. Like this is still kind of outside of my wheelhouse. Like it really kind of labors dissonance and atmosphere over like songs that are actually memorable. But there were moments I actually did get into. So yeah, I am giving Portal a bit of a chance here. So honestly, in the future, I might walk backwards into their discography in terms of their earlier stuff, because walking forwards, it just seems to get more and more unhinged. But I don't know. I still have no idea what to make of this band, but I have to admit I'm pretty interested in this. This was engaging, you know, not on a musical like, oh, I can't wait to play this in the car and fucking take a nice trip down a dark highway to. That's never gonna fucking happen. But I would listen to this again, and I would continue to check out maybe some of their earlier stuff just to get a better feel for it. But yeah, this was actually pretty decent. So if you're a fan of Night Terrors and brutality, I don't know, it's just hard to describe. If you're a fan of like just some of the most heavy, uncomfortable music out there, then there's a good chance you're already a Portal fan. But if you're not, and you haven't listened to Portal, maybe go ahead and listen to some Portal. And maybe this isn't a bad place to start. Again, I still need to listen to more of it to get a better feel for this band. But I also like getting sleep, so I might not do that for a little while. But either way, check it out. This was honestly pretty decent. All right, that knocks out another collection update, and the next one we will be getting into the fucking Florida run, because yeah, I fucking went hog wild in some record stores, and I'll be honest, not all of that is metal. There's gonna be a lot of non-metal stuff in there, a lot of stuff from my childhood, but trust me, there's gonna be a fucking ton of metal as well. And then, spoiler alert, after that we'll get into all the shit I bought in Denver, because not only did I buy a lot of stuff at the fest itself from all the bands, I bought a lot of stuff in record stores there because they allowed me to freely roam around Denver and go to record stores. I gotta be honest, those record stores were fucking awesome. So yeah, plenty of that coming. Honestly, I'll probably do a States of Metal coming next, and for those of you on our Patreon, you probably know which state I'm doing next, but for the rest of you, I'm gonna keep it a surprise until it premieres. So of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there, as well as our store, which now that we are all officially back from Denver Death Fest, we will start working on some merch ideas. We've been kind of lax on that one just because the Denver Death Fest thing took up so much time, but that has concluded, and that was a lot of fun. And of course, check out the recap for that, which either has premiered by now or is still coming. But Jam & John and Miller are going to actually talk about that and the whole fest and the whole experience. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm just kind of like thrilled to be back home for a little while, because I've done way too much traveling and I'm a bit of a homebody and I kind of miss this place. And of course, thank you all so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that shit. It means the fucking world to us. It's amazing seeing this channel grow. Plenty of stuff coming in the future, you know, newer segments, some old segments revisited, tons of reviews. Yeah, there's a ton of metal to talk about, and we're going to do our best to see if we can talk about all of it. So once again, thank you all so much, and we will catch you later.